Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this leadership briefing on careers education. We're going to get started bang on time, and I know lots of people will drop in and as we go. But yes, thank you for joining us, taking the time out of your busy day and at this busy time of year. I think we've got a real mix of attendees with careers leaders in schools and systems, as well as curriculum leads. So thank you so much. This will be recorded and we will share it. So please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A. If you have any questions, we'll come to them at the end. But what I'd really like to do is just whistle stop through some of the latest information and data and evidence as people are going into planning for next year about how important careers education is and where it fits in our broader education strategy. So we're going to fire straight into it. And I'm going to set the scene for the message I want you to take away from today. And it's based on a time I was in a classroom when we were launching Become to a group of Year 6 students. And we told them a bit about the project, that they were going to be doing careers education and getting to think about what really interested them and explore their future a little bit and test things out. And straight away, one of the 12-year-olds put up his hands and went, wait, like, why are we doing this now? It's ages before we have to make a decision. I've got no idea. And so we explained, most schools and traditional models leave it till the very end of high school, and then you've got to make this quick decision, but they're going to have the chance to test things out. And that means that all the little decisions they make along the way about how hard they work, who they sit next to, whether they turn up, whether they do their homework, they can work out whether that matters for their future. And he kind of stopped me there and he was like, right, okay, I get it. So what you're saying is that school is like this big reality TV show. And when you get to the end, there's winners and losers, and the winners have got loads of options for what they're going to do with their life, and it's going to be amazing. And that the losers might have no options because they made bad decisions along the way. But nobody bothers to tell you the rules of the game until you get to the end. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. That's kind of where we're at. And without doing careers education throughout, that's kind of what it is. It's a bit blind for them. So that remains the best example I've had of how powerful this is and how connected it is to our education strategy. So in today's briefing, it follows on from recent discussions with the National Catholic Education Commission and the article they published with kind contributions from Catholic Ed South Australia, I think Louise and Murphy, who's the head of pathways there, and Rosary School, one of the primary schools in that system who have rolled out the work, contributed some really great student stories, pictures, and evidence. So thank you for those contributions. And following on from that, this is today's briefing about why do we need to do careers differently? What is contemporary careers education right now? How Catholic schools and systems are embedding and benefiting from this approach, what they're actually doing in practice, and how we're fitting that in. And then finally, wrapping it up to where does this fit? How does careers education really connect to, not just connect to, but drive our education outcomes and priorities? Why is it such a powerful tailwind for what we're trying to achieve rather than a distraction? These are the conversations we're having every day with system leaders, education leaders. We know this is important work, and hopefully today you'll take away some key bits of evidence that you can use to help inform that planning and the strategic planning. From a career development perspective, there is this huge gap between a child's early ideas and natural curiosity about where they fit in the world, and then the system's focus at the end of high school on having a plan. And without much help and support in the middle years, because we're busy teaching them other stuff, we're asking young people to make a huge leap from this kernel of an idea which they might have, which might be based on very little exploration, very narrow awareness of what's out there, and jump from there to a plan, which will be the first step in their career journey. And we know they start with this narrow range of aspirations. We know that those aspirations are then influenced by external forces like family, peers, media, the school they're at, what people like us do jobs like this. And then, understandably, with all those pressures, they're asked to make a decision. So they're understandably going to take a shortcut. rushing to decisions there because there's this critical transition. It's inevitable. They have to, school is going to finish for everyone. There is a compulsory decision to be made, and there's a pressure and expectation that you'll have a plan. Like that's a simple thing to do. But for most, that transition decision is complex. This is a fantastic paper from the TEC in New Zealand, Transitions from Secondary School. And the research is really good. It talks about how this decision is complex for everyone, and the fact that their research showed decision-making is a skill that not many young people have had the chance to learn, let alone practice or master, before they're asked for this really big decision. They're not used to making complex decisions, ones that don't have a single right answer that can be known beforehand in advance. And the focus that we have in traditional models of a single decision implies that this is a one-off thing, rather than a cyclical process made up of lots of smaller decisions and tests and steps. As the 12-year-old boy pointed out, all of these decisions that might be impacting broadening my options or closing down my options. How do I navigate this? And because it is so complex and unknown and a new kind of decision-making for them, it's often laden with anxiety. Concerns about their future have emerged recently from Monash data, from the OECD PISA data, as the #1 source of anxiety for young people. So we have to do something about it from a well-being perspective, as well as a transitions perspective. The latest PISA 2022 data, and I'll share quite a few pieces of the different reports in here, and we'll send the references afterwards. More than a third of school students who are approaching a key decision point don't feel well informed about possible paths after the completion of schooling. So more than a third of them don't really know what their options are. 42% don't feel well prepared for it. So that's more around the skills, the skills to study, the life skills, financial literacy. And 46%, this is UK data, this stat, say school has not helped them, give them the confidence to make decisions. And that's not surprising. As the New Zealand paper said, this is a different kind of skill. This is the explicit skill to be lifelong learners, to work out that next step. And we often in school strategy statements talk about lifelong learning as the answer to this rapidly changing world. But lifelong learning is not an innate skill. This is something we have to give people the time and space to learn and adopt. So the Monash Uni paper that I'm sure lots of you are familiar with, again, a great study, and My Future did a webinar alongside Dr. Joe Gleason about the full data set, not just the female side. So definitely worth a watch. One of the key things that stood out to me was that 55% said they were choosing careers to please other people, taking shortcuts, using just decision heuristics without that capacity to design their future for themselves. They're having it defined for them. This is what other people think would be good, and I've got nothing else to go on, so I'm just going to go with that. That influence, that external influence of what's accepted and what's expected, that they've learned through those years, from those early years of, if I say I want to be an engineer, do people nod at that? Does that seem socially acceptable? The career development research is really strong about how we absorb these gender stereotypes, social status stereotypes, what prestige level of job we should be aiming for. So there is no surprise here without those skills. And even of those who have a plan, 37% say they don't feel like it's their plan. So having a plan is not a great ambition for our Student Futures program. We really have to question, what does success look like for our careers programs, for our graduates from our schools and systems? What do we want? And now from Catholic education perspective, we talk a lot about flourishing and students who can thrive beyond the school gates in life and the community. How do we teach them to do that? Quick look at this framework that we use multiple times, and it kind of underpins a lot of our philosophies and theories. Become is built on the tenets of chaos theory of careers. Dr. Jim Bright is our Director of Evidence and Impact, and those of you who are at the Career Development Association conference a couple of weeks ago would have seen his keynote. But the simple framework that we use is this vertical axis is about exploration and how much you've done, how much exploration and action. So from I haven't really explored or done much to I've actively done a lot and looked around a lot. I feel like I'm open and broad and active in this space. And on the horizontal axis, from I've got no idea at all to totally decided. Now, traditional models of career development, when we only come in that transition time and have successes of everyone having a plan for the next step, it doesn't take into account where they've started from. So we will have students who have huge human capital support, conversations around the dinner table, really broad access to multiple networks of different careers, who might have actively explored lots, and ones who haven't really been exposed to much. We've got schools that we work with where, you know, they're third, fourth, fifth generation unemployment, and Centrelink is how you get your money. So wherever they start with, if we don't recognize that complexity and those influences and do that broad aspiration and awareness first, if we just go, we don't really mind where we get to, can you just do this test and you're going to come out with the plan, whether it's yours or not, that's shortcuts. So when we allocate just a few lessons just for this transition, we're indicating to everyone that this doesn't matter much, that you don't need to be able to think about it. We don't mind where you start from. Let's just get to this endpoint. It's a focus on the outcome rather than learning the process. So we can't really be surprised that 70% of them are getting knocked off course just 18 months after making that single decision. That was really interesting research recently published by Dr. Trent Loader, sorry, newly PhD anointed, again, based on the chaos theory of careers. And that we're seeing also around 50% tertiary dropout rates, between 20 to 50%. We can't be surprised at that because they haven't had time to think about this properly. And if we don't give them those time, tools, and skills to explore, we're setting them up for failure. And they feel like a failure. They've invested their identity, their money, their time in that next step that was untested and really not done the due diligence on. And they will feel like a failure. But it's not that. It's just because we haven't given them the time and given the skills to make an informed decision and be able to adapt as things change. So from a career development perspective and successful transitions, we have to bridge that gap. And careers education is key to closing that gap. But it's worth stopping and checking, as we have in every professional development and system conversation we've had for the last 18 months since we realized we were not all talking about the same thing. It's worth stopping to say, are we talking about the same thing? We still often, when we're talking about the Become program to people, we'll often have people say, oh, but we've got a careers website. You know, we use My Future, we use career tools. Fantastic. They're not the same thing. It's not one tool for the whole shebang. Careers is this huge umbrella, and it incorporates information, advice, guidance, and education. All of them are really important, and they all fall under this umbrella often of career development as a profession, but there's really nuanced things within it. For education, the outcome is not the decision. The education piece focuses on the acquisition of skills to manage this process of lifelong learning. And that's often what's missing. So when we put quality careers education in, it is critical for preventing those heuristics, those shortcuts people are using to make decisions when they're faced with a deadline and a daunting decision and a lot of information. In fact, we know the moments of choice research came out of the UK that talked about we don't need more information. As young people, we do not need more information. We need to have the inspiration and the engagement and the motivation to engage with that information. How do we know ourselves and be inspired enough to know which way to go through that information? Because if I'm not inspired, I'm not going to engage with the information. There's a little snippet of research we did recently with career tools around schools that are using both, just to make that point of information versus inspiration. And this school said, I want parents, teachers, and students to be able to access up-to-date information in one place at any time. They use career tools for that. There's lots of others as well. But I also want students to have quality career education with tangible things they've done at every year level as a product of their learning and education journey. So a real difference in focus. One is utility information at their fingertips and great functionality around that and access. The other one is deep learning outcomes. This is from that New Zealand paper that they came up with the same thing. The right information is critical, it's important, but school leavers also need the skills to use it. Now, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, who manages the PISA data globally, also manages the Career Readiness Project that I'm sure most of you are very familiar with, so excuse me repeating it, but it is fantastic work. And, you know, not perfect in terms of indicators and research. They're making a great project and collaboration project out of not a lot of research. So the more we can contribute, and we are committed to contributing to this research as well, the better. But I would say to everybody, please follow them, get familiar with the research, what's working, what's not working, and continue to push the field forward. When they looked at what works for making teenagers career ready, so they look at what works for school leavers by the time they get to 30. And not just in terms of pay, but in terms of happiness and fulfillment and pay and doing something that matches their potential in whatever field. They found 3 buckets of things that worked. And one bucket was having the chance to explore their future broadly in lots of different ways. So increasing that awareness of what's out there. The other one was experiencing the world of work. There's many initiatives that do this. Most schools try and do it, give them tasters, and they put kind of parameters around how many experiences and touch points with the world of work are ideal at the moment, and that continues to evolve. But the big bucket that it was clearly lacking is thinking about their future. How do we give them the time and space to think about their future? And that's really the challenge we're talking about today, because it takes time and it takes space. So we have to fight for that in the curriculum. It would be very easy for us to build a tool, and there are many tools. Here's a test, this will give you the answers, but it doesn't do the job. It doesn't build this critical thinking and that skill to think about their future and make great decisions. We know it's harder, but it does work. So there is a growing global understanding of what works. In the UK, they had a parliamentary inquiry. They already have the Gatsby benchmarks just come through a review that said we need to do this deeper. They were already doing it pretty well, but they were saying it's too easy to tick a box and say we've done careers education and not have the impact. In Australia, we've obviously got the Better Fair Education report that really talks about the importance of careers education early for equity, and the Universities Accord, where we've got huge targets to achieve in terms of participation, and that growth has to come from getting in early and helping people build the capacity to aspire and that agency to navigate to it. Essentially, all of these wrapped up to the same summary that effective careers education, the stuff that actually has impact, has to be done early, often, and integrated throughout school. And it's going to be critical to achieving not just our workforce vision and the productivity measures, but also our education outcomes. Every education strategy we see wants these same outcomes that we're going to show you in a minute are delivered by careers education. But it is really important that we understand as a collective and back in your own context what success looks like. So it is about moving from that everyone having a plan, any plan, even if it's not their plan, to teaching them the ins and outs of planfulness as a state of engagement with the moving world. And this means agency over your career choices and the capacity to experiment and embrace opportunities. Really open, really flexible. And I love, you'll hear that word agency again and again. And I know it's thrown around everywhere in education. But when we talk about real agency, not just agency within a project, but real agency over your learning and life, that's the gold standard. And that's what we're working on here. There's actually a really interesting conversation around with the Melbourne New Metrics project around their agency as a learner capability versus agency over your learning and life, but a whole other webinar and discussion. So what we're trying to do is encourage students, teach them the skills to make decisions and live with change. People who are open to explore and be curious about different options and inspired enough to do that will seek to know themselves and their personal motivations so that when they do need to make a decision, they can call it to the best of their ability at that point. And balance being focused with being open, not fixate on a plan that's got to be perfect. This is for chaos theory of careers enthusiasts, this will feel very familiar to you. So we're not going to go into very much detail today about Become, apart from showing how enough overview to show how the schools that we're talking about are using this, and schools and systems are using Become to support their best practice. You can definitely, if you haven't already read the case study by the NCEC, we can share that as well afterwards. But it is helping schools. How do we help schools create this time and space to do this properly and move from that scramble for answers at the end of high school to a model of early, often, and integrated, so that students have a chance to engage repeatedly, not just once, but twice, 3 times throughout their school life, with their future and their ideas for their future as they evolve. So that mastery of this cyclical process, starting from the upper primary years. So the case study that you would have read in the article was focused on year 6. We start from year 5, and schools often, and schools and systems often go for a year 5, 6 cohort, a year 7 and 8 cohort, and a year 9 or 10 cohort. So maybe giving people 3 hits, sometimes 2 hits at this in different ways before they have to make those big high stakes decisions. Again, here you'll see success is not about an outcome, a decision. It's about learning the adaptive skills, and the program and platform helps them start from where they are, meets them where they're at, and allows them to personalize their own guidance and journey. The way we support schools to do this work is for students. They all have access to the Become Me web app and journal. This is their kind of safe space, their exploratorium that opens up the whole world of work for them. For educators, we know that, moving to the whole school approach is a massive challenge, probably the biggest challenge we have. So a lot of our focus with systems, when we're working with systems, is on building the confidence, capability, and enthusiasm of all teachers to be teachers of student futures. The lessons are all curriculum aligned and designed to be the most interesting discussion that a teacher will have with their students, and surprise them with what careers education is, and the fact that it's got real outcomes. We need to elevate this to a proper subject that teaches a curriculum, a timetable to teach and see the value in. This is not 10 minutes at the end of form time, just shove it in there. In everyone's mind, it needs to be elevated to the priority that it is, to have the power that it can have. And we also deliver PD in lots of flexible formats to help build that capability, whether it's bite-sized or it's all staff meetings or whole system PD days, all of that. And for schools and systems in the back end, you get these insights into their emerging aspirations, so we can be proactive from those earlier years about how are their aspirations evolving, emerging, how is their engagement, and what can we do to plan better electives based on what they're like? How are they going to meet the world in this region in terms of employability versus where they're aiming for? We know that misalignment is a big issue. Again, a whole other session on that. The model, so from year 5 to year 10 is our core focus. And each year there's a different option for the program, again, with tangible outcomes, but every grade has a program, a master scope and sequence that's mapped that goes through these 3 learning domains in different ways. So awareness of the broad, constantly changing world of work, and awareness of my unique and changing self, and the chance to unpick all those influences that are shaping their aspirations. How do we give them a chance to chip away at those before they have to, and try and create a blank canvas so they have a little shot at designing a future that they feel is perfect for them. And that's where the aspiration biz comes in. How do I create possibilities that excite me? A future designed by them, not defined for them. So real low stakes creativity and critical thinking about whether it would be a good fit or not. And rather than come up with an idea and go, okay, that'll do, I'll put that in my pocket and hope for the best. And then 2 years into uni, I'll go, oh, that's not at all what I thought. We want them to get active. We want them to develop real agency over their future. So for each year group and grade, there's an opportunity in different formats and different project outcomes to do something to test and practice and refine their ideas. And we often see around 50% of those tests result in a change of plan, which is fantastic. That fast fail, they're prototyping their ideas while it's low stakes. So I'm not going to go into detail in all of those. I'll show you, for example, in awareness, These are one grade scope and sequence. So the program can be done, you know, if we just do the awareness piece, we're going to have massive impact on awareness, and they're blowing open their aspirations. So even, you know, 4 lessons is better than none. So it can be done really simply for powerful outcomes, or 10 lessons, let's get through to that aspiration piece, or the ideal, which would be 20 lessons in those younger years. In the older years, we still say 10 lessons is going to be fine. It's a really tight program, and they've got grades that they can go faster. But these lessons, as you'll see from the title, are really supposed to surprise everyone and hook them in. You know, top secret business, invisible jobs. They're designed to be engaging from the outset and really surprise people. The app itself underpins the lessons. It's not a sit down at the website and work through it yourself. It underpins a lot of those lessons. And I'll just show you a couple of ways. It's designed to overcome that issue that they can't, you know, the adage that's very well worn and misattributed to lots of people, that they can't be what they can't see. This is a bit glitchy on the stream, but essentially it blows open. Instead of asking them questions to funnel them down, the app serves to explode the whole world of work, no matter who they are or where they are, and give them the chance to react to it, to say, why is that interesting to me right now? And what questions do I have about it? They can also explore, from a subject point of view, like the old bullseye posters, but on steroids. Or they can explore by search. So if they're super decided, they can start there. And as they're exploring, they're building up their critical thinking. You know, what works for me? What am I interested in? And we're starting to see patterns that expose their motivations and their questions, and what are the levers that are important to them in this. So we had to build a lesson called I Didn't Know That Was a Thing, because that's all you hear for the first, you know, 3 lessons of their exploration, as they see just how much they didn't know about the world of work. So really want them to do that divergent thinking and exploration and go crazy before they start to narrow things down. And what we see is we can really, really quickly and simply impact that narrow aspirations. So you will have seen the data from everywhere, from the OECD, from the PISA data, that 50% of students aspire to the top 10 occupations. We see at a school level, every school we work with gets a pre-programmed picture of their aspirations for that cohort. We see that that effect is almost double. So 50% of students in any one cohort aspiring to around 5 occupations. So super narrow. But what we see is really fast, that given the chance to explore broadly and think deeply, they diversify those aspirations. So those shortcuts are broken. So pre-program, 20 students had doctor. Yes, I'll be a doctor. That was the right answer. And post-program, 12 of them had found something that suited them better. It's really not hard to break these. In the aspiration phase, these are some examples. They're getting excited about possible futures, but multiple futures, and linking it to their courses and subject selections. Really getting specific about the type of architecture. What are the patterns? Are they broad in their aspirations, or are they really narrow in a field? And really importantly, they're sharing those emerging aspirations. This is a picture from the Rosary School, and in the article, Susan Hennessy, kindly, the principal, said that using the program helps children understand their dignity and capacity to make positive contributions to the world. It encourages them to feel hopeful about their futures, discern what's important to them in a vocation, and recognize the impact they can have on society. Feeling positive and excited about the future is so important in helping our children become thriving people, capable learners, and leaders for the world God desires. These students are really growing, and you can see how aligned that is. And I was at a flipped career expo where the younger students present their ideas as though, and get everything apart from the traditional career expo, which is often passive and floating around and taking your stuff in. It's them in the driving seat presenting their experiments on their ideas for the future. And a secondary principal walked into this primary event, and he stayed for about an hour and a half and spoke to every student, and their outcomes of a teacher or adult knows my ideas for my future, that feeling known and belonging, went up 205%. each one of them had told that principal what their current plan was for their future. And he had the chance to welcome them as a transition activity and talk about how high school would help that. In the agency part of the program, and this is kind of the critical piece, it's not about giving them the information. It's about putting them in charge. More questions than answers. So in the lessons, question tennis, dig master, doing the groundwork, they're learning to ask better questions, not what's Google's top answer for how much does a dentist earn. In the app, they are not being overwhelmed by information. This is the start point for their inspiration, not the end point. So is it interesting to me right now? Why? What are my questions to research based on the lessons I've just been doing? And then when they get to their experiments, they're asking killer questions, ones that only they can answer. Would I enjoy the daily routine of being a zoo vet? Does being a drummer give you a flexible schedule? Does being a psychologist make you depressed? Or critically, how can I help my parents agree with what my career choice is? They're doing the thinking and the research and answering those questions for themselves. And you can see here some of the pride in their work. I wanted to share, when we're just about to come on to talking about the connection to literacy and numeracy, because we know that's such a focus in schools at the moment. And that's obviously, the trade-off in terms of time spent. This is an example of a girl in a year 7 in a Catholic school in Queensland who initiated an email through her as a part of her agency project. She wrote this and crafted it, scaffolded, and all the resources are there, but you can see the level of inspiration that sits behind this and the level of care she's put into this email. You can see that she said she's got dyslexia, but she's really passionate. And that final persuasive clinch at the bottom, no one thinks I'll get an answer. Please help me prove them wrong. So we really encourage them to reach out beyond their networks. How do I track down someone who can help me? And when we see schools get replies and students get replies from beyond their network, feeling that global connection to the outside world and then bringing the outside world in rather than bringing the school, bringing people in, we see absolute transformations. I'm not going to get you to read this whole thing from the Disney animator, and my glasses are not that powerful to read it. He went crazy on that he also had learning difficulties at school. What she should start by testing drawing to understand herself more as an artist, the characters she should draw, how does she work out what style she has. The second page, when you printed out the email, was about if you have some pocket money, this is the equipment you could buy. These are the people to follow. 2 full pages. She replied and said, thank you so much for your help, and appropriately followed up. And we see a lot of this, almost connecting as mentors, because they're learning these skills of resourcefulness and having the confidence to reach out and connect. And then he replied again, I think that's all I've got to offer. And he replied and said, well, looky there, in Mickey Mouse language. You never know what will happen till you try. Thanks for taking the time to reach out, with a personalized sketch of Mickey Mouse. So really tangible outcomes, that's a year 7 student doing their career experiment to find out what skills does it take? How do you know what type of animation you're going to do? How can I get a job at Disney? At year 10, our Become Your Own Careers Advisor is much more pointy end. We're trying to get them to design pathways, contingency plans for themselves. So we know there's lots of pathways maps already pre-done for certain occupations, which is great and a great backup. But we want to have high expectations that students can learn these skills, do the research for themselves, and engage with the information for themselves. That's true agency. They're going to have to do it themselves in the future. Let's make them do it now. And that also means they're not locked into the ones that someone else has designed for them in predetermined career paths. These should be unique and about their ideas for their future. For each, we talked about the importance of elevating this as an important subject and as an important area. So we really, for each program, and not all schools have the time to do this, certainly in year 1, often people grow into doing this piece, but a flipped career expo, as I said, really, really elevates that and gives it an authentic audience, an authentic outcome, and lets them have pride in it and see where the project is going. There's an end point. In year 10, become your own careers advisor. Obviously, a far more advanced level, same domains of awareness, aspiration, and agency that they go through. But in this, we're transforming, the outcome is them transforming subject selection. So rather than go in passively with questions about, I don't know what to do, can you tell me what this is? They are the ones in the driving seat. They're scaffolded over 10 lessons to really explore broadly, think deeply, and do the critical research and thinking that will make them feel confident that they've got the skills to make these decisions for themselves. I'll quickly show you a little video because it's the same girl.
I want to be a Disney animator. I've been artsy since I was like 3. I've loved it my whole life. My teacher, Miss O'Brien, she was very supportive as soon as she heard I emailed Walt Disney Studios. When I got a reply from Walt Disney, I was just overwhelmed. I could not believe it, what I was reading. One of the things that we think is really important is for young people not just to succeed while they're at school, but to have really flourishing and meaningful lives after school. It's really important to normalise the fact that we change our minds. I'm interested in flying aircraft. I was really pleased to have the ability to actually look into the program. We know that for all students, career education is really essential.
Thanks to Unity and Brisbane Catholic Education for allowing us to share that as well. So as I said, the idea is that students do multiple career experiments before those high stakes decisions are due, and around 50% are resulting in a change of plan. Maybe a total change of like, that's not at all what I want to do anymore. I don't want to put dogs down all day, or a tweak. Like I thought I might make it as a pro athlete, but then my backup was physio or coach, but actually there's this whole other world of sport. And actually I might be great at the data visualization. I love the stats behind sport. Or I'd be a great curator in the MCG Museum. Like the history of sport is really fascinating. All of these possibilities when they go broader rather than narrow. So we know that doing this pays it forward. We know that has a great impact on career readiness. Careers education prepares them to make better decisions, to have the confidence to act, and the bias to action as well, to learn that actually they can do it now. Life has already started. They can reach out to someone. They can make that contact, pick up the phone, God forbid. That's a whole lesson that we need to develop on that. But looping back around, when we know that doing that is going to set them up for success at transition time and in their future transitions, there's still this big challenge that we have and talk about every single day, that there's no time for careers education. We know in Singapore, in the UK, things are moving in this direction. We think policy is coming to meet us and seeing how powerful this work is. But in the current climate, when there's so much pressure to focus on literacy and numeracy outcomes and explicit instruction, like it or hate it, is it too costly is the question to allocate 4 lessons, 8 lessons, 10 lessons, 20 lessons per year, twice during their schooling, to giving students a chance to think explicitly about their future? Well, you know, that's a debate. There's no question where I sit on that, and lots of the people in the webinar room, I'm sure, would be on our side. But it doesn't stack up until we can prove that return on education. So when we look at the gap and what happens in that gap between those primary middle years, during those critical years, we know that's a high point for disengagement and questioning of what's the point of this. Well, we might care a lot about raising academic literacy and numeracy outcomes. Do they really care if their heart's not in it, if the inspiration is not there? So our own data and the freshly published PISA 2022 data is exciting because it shows clearly that investing in careers education has a positive return on those things that matter most to achieving our educational outcomes. Careers education in this gap, in those middle years where there traditionally isn't any space, is an absolute tailwind for our education strategy, not a distraction or something else to fit in. So I'm going to share quickly some of those key findings. The PISA data 2022, volume 5, students who are supported to develop and express aspirations are more likely to seek out information, connect their learning, and build motivation for learning. So we know this from longitudinal data as well, that having an aspiration creates an instrumental motivation for learning. They can see their why. They might not love it, but they know they're going to need it. The data shows students who engage with their future, as in have the chance to explore things and research their future, show more motivation for learning. This might be coming up tiny for you, but I love learning new things in school. School has taught me things which will be useful. I like school and doing work that is challenging. Not so much of an uplift for I want to do well in maths. Maths is a bit of an outlier here, but definitely in terms of literacy and all other subjects. And this is what we hear from teachers as well, including Rosary in that article, shared that teachers report an uplift in motivation and engagement across all subject areas. And now we've got global data showing the same. Our own data post-program asks pre and post, how connected is what you learn at school to what you're interested in doing in the future? And even from one cycle of the program, we see a 20% uplift. That in itself is worth it. The second point is that students who do research on future job use more critical thinking, more likely to be proactive, meticulous, and motivated in their learning. In fact, all the learning capabilities are positively correlated with students who have the chance to do research on their future jobs. And it also correlates with a more flexible and open mindset. They score 8% higher in these things. So all learning strategies are positively related to seeking future-oriented information. Controlling a learning, critical thinking is almost over 10 points. I mean, we want these motivated, inspired learners who are proactive, have agency over their learning and life in the classroom. And this is proven to be doing it. It's also really related to flexibility and openness, which are the skills recognized as critical for lifelong learning in our rapidly changing world, as we all know. And the third point around educational outcomes and what's important to us is that careers education outcomes and well-being outcomes are aligned. So students who have the chance to explore their future, to build that confidence and capability that they can handle the decisions, show less anxiety, and feel more positive and hopeful about their future than those who don't. We're removing that massive source of anxiety about it and giving them the chance to do it. So from a purely pragmatic point of view, we know academic and core curriculum time is really well protected, whereas well-being time often is the place where people are searching for things that are more tangible and practical and engaging for students. So using Become and a careers education program that is all about them, knowing that it has this massive impact on well-being, is often the space that people are putting it from a timetable perspective. So just to finish off, I'm just going to summarize that the magic happens. That gap that we talked about, careers education is the magic that happens in that gap. And it's across all of these outcomes. It's kind of annoying that there's so many because it makes people feel a bit fuzzy about whether they're powerful or not. But hopefully we've got the evidence there that shows how powerful it is. So more personalized, broader aspirations, increased academic engagement, and there's a heap of research that proves this as well as what I've shown today. Improved academic outcomes, well-being, students feel known. We know there's powerful equity outcomes in building that capacity to aspire from earlier. So really important for achieving that university's accord targets, and long-term and broader effects. So the question should no longer be, where does careers fit into education? It's too busy. But where does education fit into their career? This is about their agency over their learning and life. So let them see where education fits into that and give them the chance to fit it together for themselves. And we'll have more motivated, inspired learners sitting in front of us across every subject. That's the return on education that we are buying by doing this work. It's a big session, so we have actually put together a set of evidence cards that have those top 8 kind of truths and pieces of evidence that you can use in an ELT meeting, almost as career cards to throw out what's important to your education strategy, what are your strategic priorities at school, and map them, prioritize them. Which one are we going to focus on with our careers education program? And the proof is in there to be able to share with the team. Okay, well, We're aiming for a 20% uplift in that. You said that's the most important thing to shift. Let's do it. If you would like a copy of those, as well as to talk about or book a chat for using Become at your school or system, please drop me an email here at liv@become.education. But thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.